Are you struggling with roadblocks as a woman in the challenging and constantly changing world of corporate America? If you feel stuck in your career, you may be holding yourself back and may not even realize it. Prepare to be enlightened by the meaningful discussions here at the No Woman Left Behind podcast. Each week, gather the insight you need to break down those walls of limiting beliefs. Unleash your full potential and unlock the leader within. Listen to raw conversations with corporate women as they share inspiring stories with the purpose of obtaining their dream career and living a truly fulfilling life. Here's your host, Rosie Zilinskas.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Recently, I delivered a talk called Knowing Your Worth to a group of females, and many of them were engineers. After the talk, I spoke to a couple of female engineers, and they each told me that they still didn't feel like they were good enough to be an engineer or to lead a team. Now, these are engineers. Obviously, they've had a lot of schooling, they've had a lot of education, and one of them was a director of a department, the other one had a team that she was leading. It all boils down to that pesky imposter syndrome. So today we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome, being aware of your thoughts, and more importantly, what you can do when it pops up. Imposter syndrome is never going to go away, but there is a way for you to work with your imposter syndrome. In order to do that, we're going to talk to two amazing women. We have Dr. Ann Dranitsaris and Heather Dranitsaris-Hilliard, a mother-daughter team. They wear many hats. They're consultants, executive coaches, trainers, speakers, and authors, adapting their expertise and solutions to help clients discover and dismantle dysfunctions in their relationships at work, at home, in organizations, and in leadership. We're going to talk about personalities, and we're also going to talk about a neurological framework for understanding the drivers of our behavior. So with that, stay tuned for this conversation with Ann and Heather. Good morning, Ann and Heather. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Okay, so I know you guys have a ton of books and you have a ton of experience, but this is where I want to start today. I attended an event just a couple of weeks ago, and this event had female engineers. They work for the road industry. And one of the young ladies, actually two of the women, they're accomplished, they're engineers, and the one conversation that kept coming up is that they don't feel that they belong. It's that imposter syndrome that keeps coming up over and over and over. And I know that you have some really good information on how women can deal with imposter syndrome, some tools, and No Woman Left Behind, we cater to women in the corporate world. So I want to start there. If we can tackle that imposter syndrome for these accomplished women that just don't feel that they belong.
Thank you so much for having us, Rosie. I just want to say that before I launch into to my answer here. I really appreciate you having us on the show because your audience is really so much in need in understanding and tackling the imposter syndrome, because it is a phenomenon where while we're seeking that external approval and validation, we actually forget or can disconnect from who we actually are and our potential because we're so busy trying to fit in and belong that we don't realize that, hey, as professionals, we've already made it. We don't need anybody's stamp of approval. But it's like our brain is wired to keep seeking it after, like we've already made it, but we keep on going because we've always done that. And our brain is wired in these patterns where, despite having grown and developed and achieved, how we feel internally because of the messages our brain keeps sending us, keeps us stuck in this place of not feeling good enough and doubting whether or not we fit in. Sometimes we actually have more competence and more to offer than our peers.
And I have known that women keep trying to instead of working on the confidence, they're working on attaining more certifications. Let's get one more certificate. Let's get one more degree. Let's get, whatever. And so what are some things then that you recommend to your clients? Some, I don't know, just some stories maybe that you can share with us on how you have your clients overcome those feelings of not belonging, of not being good enough.
So we always talk to our clients about it from that perspective that it's a developmental gap, right? So it's not so much that we're going to overcome or just get rid of it, because it's there and it's something that we have to work our way through. But there is a path that we take our clients through always. And one of the first ones is to really start to understand what we call your imposter syndrome script. So that's what runs in our head that says, I should have known, I should have been aware, I shouldn't have done that, or the feeling, that comment of I'm not good enough, or this isn't good enough, my work's not good enough, they're going to figure out. So whatever that is that keeps running through your brain, that track that keeps you stuck in the imposter syndrome, is the first place that we start. Because I have to be aware of it, not to then say, okay, well, when that comes up, I need to ignore it, because our brain actually abhors a vacuum. So what we have to do instead is replace these negative thoughts, these automatic negative thoughts that are in us because of our growth and development and emergences through childhood and into adulthood, and replace it with things that are realistic and supportive and positive, and in being, again, what do I need to say to myself that's going to encourage me? So instead of I should have known, it's, I should have known, I should have caught that mistake, I should have, all those shoulds that go through our brain. It's, given what went on, there's no way I possibly could have known. That's a realistic thought versus the automatic, should have, judgmental, again, you're imposter, there's something wrong with you. So that's the place, one of the first actions that we have to ground ourselves in really knowing and understanding. And I would say from my own perspective, because both Anne and I worked our way through the imposter syndrome, which is part of the experience that we share with our clients, is, I can say I never have that thought anymore. I should have, which was so prevalent for me in my 20s and my 30s, just by becoming really, really aware of it and starting to actually challenge that thought and think about things in a more concrete and realistic way.
Got it. Okay. So for example, the one woman that I knew, she's probably, I'm going to say she's late 40s. Because she was talking about having a teenager, and she said, I'm in a room of a lot of male engineers, and I'm generally the only female engineer. And I feel like they don't take me seriously, or I feel like they don't, really respect my thought process. And I don't think that's a new concept. Obviously we've been, combating the fact of we really are trying to belong, to gain that respect. What would you say, Heather, if you were talking to the woman that I was talking to, and she's like, I'm an engineer and the other engineers don't take me seriously, which makes me feel like I don't belong. What would you have said then to that woman in that moment, Heather?
For me, it would be to, again, it's a feeling she's talking about, right? That's her feeling. Yes. I would be asking for what are the evidence? Like, what are the facts that are actually present? And because, again, I feel like they don't take me seriously because my thought process is different. Well, how is it different? And what evidence do you have that they're not taking you seriously? Because if you're at the table, if you've been elevated and promoted and have a track record of success, what's the evidence, and what is the actual issue? What is the actual issue? Is there discomfort that they present because they don't know how to build the same relationship with a female colleague versus a male colleague? Like what? Because again, we'll often personalize. When we're struggling with the imposter syndrome, we'll often personalize the actions of others as evidence that we're not good enough or that there's something wrong with us, as opposed to looking at it and saying, well, what is this about them And so, yes, this is the feeling I'm experiencing. Perhaps is that feeling legitimate from that perspective of, are there facts that are triggering this particular feeling? And what's the issue that I want to do something about? And is this just theirs and they need to own it and it's got nothing to do with me?
And I think sometimes we see things that aren't there. You know, like you just said, we collect that evidence that is not there. And, you know, honestly, sometimes that happens with my husband and I when we're talking about something and I was like, you know, you said this, and he goes, I never said that. Where did you get that? So, you know, we really need to kind of pay attention to that evidence that we are collecting, you know, to support whatever thought. I always tell people, you know, just because you have a thought doesn't mean that it's a right thought. It doesn't mean that it's an, you know, accurate thought, or that, you know, like it happens to my husband and me sometimes. It's like, okay, well, he said something, I took it in, I interpreted it and then changed it somehow in my head. And he's like, I never said that. So I imagine that, you know, kind of the same thing happens. So once you are aware that you're doing that, what's your next step then to work on that?
One of the things that, as Heather and I have worked with leaders throughout for the past several decades, many decades, is recognizing that most leaders are left brain and they're very functionally competent, and that they have risen to positions because of their functional competence, and where they fall behind in their development are their more of those interpersonal skills. And I say this in relationship to engineers because the majority of engineers are left brain people. I mean, we need to be in order to do the tasks an engineer has to do. And so if you look at that pathway that they take in terms of, you know, developing up their functional competence and then feeling anxious on the interpersonal side, and then going and getting more functional competence, that they're really not focusing on the right place to develop. And so those imposter, to answer your question, those imposter feelings, like I feel like a fraud, really not a feeling, it's an imposter feeling, or I feel like I'm not being respected, again, not a feeling, is that we have to pull back and really look inside and feel what we're actually experiencing. And so in a scenario like that, an engineer might feel somewhat deflated or devalued because they're not getting the recognition they need. And instead of saying, you know, something about them, it's, oh, what would be my strategy for getting more recognition, or asking for feedback in this scenario. But absolutely, the focus of development needs to be on the interpersonal and strengthening and really understanding, as Heather said, the imposter syndrome scripts and the imposter feelings and the lies the brain will tell us about what's going on when they're absolutely not true.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself, as far as like the lies that your brain tells you that are not true, like the stories, you know, the things that we make up in our head. And sometimes you have fights with somebody, you know, and you're like Heather, you were saying, I should have said this, and, you know, I could have done that. Heather, you said that now you really don't should yourself anymore. Obviously, you have life experience, you've been around. Someone that is in their early 20s, that is just starting off in their career, they don't have that life experience. And obviously, we have that script that, you know, we want people to pay attention to. But what are like some actionable things that a 20-something could do as far as paying attention to their thoughts, and how do they start? What does that awareness do, and how can they improve that?
Yes, if you think about that, some of that ones around the should, right, is that perfectionism, which is one of the symptoms of the imposter syndrome, right? Although if you had approached me in my 20s and said, oh, you're perfectionistic, I would have said, no, I'm not. But in
Right.
reality, I was trying to keep everything controlled and contained and perfect so that if everything was perfect, then no one would find out that I was a fraud, right? And that no one was, no one would see the reality that I'm dealing with internally. And so if from that perspective, what I had to do was, and this is what we talk to our clients about, is setting out more realistic and objective standards. So if perfectionism is my standard, that means I have to be all knowing, superwoman, and a psychic, because I had to anticipate and so again, none of that's realistic. And so I had to set some realistic benchmarks. One of the first ones I actually started with was that it's okay to have a typo in a presentation. Right? Because a typo in my presentations could completely throw me off track, right? And then it would be the entire thing that I would obsess about, as though the other 59.5 minutes in time involved in that presentation, that everybody else was obsessing over the one typo. And I had to learn in that process too of, that trying to be more human. And so part of that's about our personality and how we develop in our personality, and recognizing, through that lens of self-awareness. Anne was talking about this too, around what is it that I need to develop in my personality and in terms of my brain and my brain style that's also going to help. Because a lot of where my imposter syndrome came up was because my relational function was much less developed compared with my other functions. And so anything that was in that relational discourse or environment, I struggled a lot more with. And so that was where the feelings would get triggered. And so I worked on developing that. And so we do the same thing with our clients, where it's understanding kind of what that developmental gap actually is, how that's tied to our personality or our brain organization, and then what the path is for each one of us. But a lot of it comes back to that bringing into the conversation in your brain more realistic objectives, more realistic standards. I will even say to myself to this day, is my client does not know what I had envisioned in my head versus what I delivered, then what I delivered is good enough. Right? So it's that notion of trying to create more realistic standards on which you're judging, essentially evaluating yourself, because the ones that the imposter syndrome puts in your head, they're not realistic. They're not possible. And so we're always falling short as a result of it.
Right. And as speakers, I'm a speaker, and I know you both do speaking as well. You're absolutely right. You're like, oh man, I forgot to do, say whatever sentence, and then when you think about it, you're absolutely right. The audience had no idea that you had to, say that you had something planned. And so in a way, we are allowing space for us to be human. And I love that you said that, because especially women, not that men don't suffer from perfectionism, but women, I think, have more of it, perfectionism, that we have to be perfect. We have to do everything. We have to be super women. And it's just absolutely impossible. Yeah, it's just so interesting. This imposter syndrome, like now being aware of it and then understanding that script or that tape that's running through your head. I think that's the first place to start. I was looking at some of your YouTubes, because you both have so much content, and we'll get into your story a little bit later. But one of the YouTube videos that I heard you speak on, you talked about confidence, competence, and capability. And I think that those three words are so key, because as you are stepping into your career from, graduating from college and then even like mid-career level, that competence and capability is what I think helps you gain that confidence. So how do those three kind of go together, in your opinion?
Well, and it's a great question to ask following what Heather was just talking about in terms of reasonable expectations, because when we're just graduating from university or college, we're not thinking, hey, I'm in my early 20s and my brain isn't even developed yet. We're saying, hey, I'm in my 20s, I should know I should know. And most people who suffer, and men and women who suffer from the imposter syndrome, have this belief that's running that they shouldn't have to go out and get experience and build competence. They sort of see, I'm in my 20s, this is a destination, I'm an adult now. Now I should know, and people expect me to know, and I need to be delivering on those the external expectations. And that's really dehumanizing, because we don't look at it from that perspective of, all right, now that I know and I'm coming to the workforce with everything that I know, I need this next decade to practice being on how to be an adult, how to take responsibility for myself, and how to get help in building confidence, competence in the workplace, and expecting people to be helpful and expecting employers to coach in a reasonable fashion, of course. But if we don't examine our beliefs, and this is where, to your previous question, practicing mindfulness and having a thought journal and writing these thoughts down and writing down what you believe and really challenging those beliefs, that can go a very long way in terms of allowing people to guide us developmentally as we go through the first years of our career, and letting ourselves off the hook for trying to be all knowing when, hey, we're 22, 23 and we've got such a little experience.
Absolutely. And I know that you both have several books that you have co-written, and then you have many other like workbooks and things like that. If we had those 20 somethings that are trying to dig into personal development, where would you point them to as far as identifying that script? Because at this point, we don't know, or they don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so when you don't know what you don't know, you don't know where to start. You don't know like what resources to tap into. So what are some resources? And I know you have a lot of free stuff on YouTube and things like that, but what are some free resources that you could point us to that script? Because I think that imposter syndrome, that lack of confidence, it always starts with our thoughts, our mindfulness. So tell me a little bit about, some of those resources.
So I know for sure on our YouTube channel, we have a whole bunch all around the imposter syndrome. So there is there, and we break it down into the different steps or elements that people have to work through, starting through the script. It's reflected in our book as well, Power Past the Imposter Syndrome. But there's a couple of things too, along with understanding how the imposter syndrome shows up with you, because there are different personas. So again, depending on our personality, we're going to use, the personas a little bit differently or in different circumstances, and being really aware of how the imposter syndrome shows up in you, right? And so because it's different, right? And that also carves out a little bit of a different developmental path. The other place that we always tell people to start, especially folks in their 20s, because I think, for me and for many of my clients, I remember this, that it's really grounding in getting to that place of accepting your uniqueness, because we spend our childhood and our high school life trying to conform and fit into whatever environment we have been raised through, be it our home environment, be it our school environment, our social context. When we're in our 20s and when we're out of university, we're in our early stages of our working life, it's our first real opportunity to sort of think about, well, who am I actually, and who am I meant to be? Not who am I, adapted to be in order to fit in and to be successful in those environments, but who am I? Because it actually starts to give us permission to be unique, to be different, to be who we actually are. And so if you've never done a personality assessment, I mean, we have the striving styles, Myers-Briggs, there's a ton of them that are out that are free. But going on that journey of self-discovery, of really understanding what's your personality, what are your preferences, how is your brain organized, what does that mean for you? Because I know for me, and it's interesting because I have a daughter who's 21, and she's been raised on this stuff, right? All about the imposter syndrome and personality in your brain and everything that Anne and I bring to the table. And she has the same personality style as I do, but it's so different for her because, you know, she's, as a female, she's a thinking, preferenced individual, as am I. So you never grow up as a child in high school feeling like you fit, because your brain style is different than the majority of the other women there, right? And so or girls that are in that environment. But for her, she's not openly talking about it. She understands it. It doesn't have the same impact on her as it did for me, because I didn't get it. I was always like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
Why am I not like these other girls? Why am I so different? Right. And then I hit my 20s and I started to explore it. And Anna and I started working together, and it was like, oh, permission to be myself. Well, talk about the best gift of shifting you out of the imposter syndrome track is to stop devaluing your own unique abilities and talents and those things that make you different, and instead really embracing them and using them to go back to that comment about confidence, right? Our confidence comes from really moving into that place of becoming who we're meant to be, and not playing that role and not sticking out, hiding out under our imposter syndrome personas. And so I would say those couple of things are really valuable in your 20s as you start this journey.
Do you feel that you're spinning your wheels and advancing your career slower than you'd like? Well, I got you, because I have a free quiz to help you figure out how you may sabotage your career advancement. Our free quiz is designed to help you identify the common pitfalls preventing you from reaching your career goals. The quiz is 100% free, and it only takes 3 minutes to complete. Take the quiz now to start taking control of your career today. The link is on the episode website. And now let's head back to today's conversation. I love that. Just giving yourself permission to be different. And I know, obviously, with social media these days, especially with teenagers, that's so hard, because what does social media do? You compare yourself to everybody else, what they're doing, you know, what they're wearing. And it's so toxic if you are not aware of the fact that it's okay for you to be you, and you don't have to be a perfect body size or, you know, perfect, you know, whatever. So it's so interesting. And so does imposter syndrome show up for your daughter at any given moment in her life?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But we can talk about why and where, and it's because of her life experience, some of the things that she's faced and she's challenged in her relationship. And I'll be, you know, we always talk about it with her father, because her father, traditional European male, boys are worthy, girls are not. Mm-hmm. So despite me being successful, confident, you know, assertive female, the fact is her journey is to work through that particular situation and really seeing and then she had school experiences that were the same. The boys that were treated differently, that as a girl, and you want that, oh, that's not possible for a career. Boys want to be hockey players. Sure, you can be a famous rich hockey player. So right. She's had this whole collection of experiences in her 21 years that were constantly framing for her that because she's a girl, she's not enough. Not from me, not from her experience in, in our family. The women are the matriarchs. They're the powerhouses, right? But it's interesting. So she's caught in this dual world, and that's her internal struggle. The difference, though, is she talks about it.
Yes, and she
knows it.
Yeah,
which is
huge
awesome. Which
difference.
I didn't have that going into my 20s.
Right. And I think that was my point of bringing up that question, because even though she grew up with the different types of frameworks that you taught her, that imposter syndrome is always going to be coming back, in and out of your head life. But knowing about it, having the mindset recognition of that script, I mean, that's what really makes the bigger difference there. So
well, and if I can add to that, Rosie, it's an absence of understanding in our society that our first part of our development is looking at the external world for validation for who we are. And that's where most people get stuck. And that's why most relationships are codependent, because people don't go into that next stage where they separate out because they are confident enough and they're strong enough in their internal world that they can say, well, that's just the way they think about it, or that's how they're behaving, not about me. This is my path, and I'm going to stay on my path. And I don't need that external validation. We get attached to it. As with social media, we get addicted to, what's going on outside of ourselves, and we get more and more disconnected from our actual authentic self and our needs and who we are as a human being. We spend a whole lifetime trying to be what other people want us to be and always feeling like a failure. And that's the imposter syndrome right there, when we've abandoned ourselves. We don't know how we feel because we're so focused on what other people feel that we're neglecting ourselves.
And that's so interesting, Anne, because I have seen that in my life. So when I was younger, even back like 5 years ago, if I had a problem, I would call my posse, so I have 3 sisters, I have my 2 best friends, and I would collect facts and I would collect information. And over the last, even 5 years, I'm like, why do I do that? And I realized that I'm more of a researcher, so I'm analytic, so I need to collect all the facts before I make a decision. But over the last handful of years, and I'm 54, so obviously this takes experience, but I've been thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, if I have a problem, I have the solution. I don't need to go and call my 3 sisters and call my 2 best friends, or now I'm like, okay, what do I think? What do I feel? What is it that is good for Rosie? Because what I would do, collect all the facts, and then I would still do what I thought was my best, solution. But I was like, why do I need all of this input? And it's because of the way my brain works. But now that I know that, I don't have to go out to get that external validation, although it's always nice to know that people support me, but they don't have to agree with me anymore. Right. And exactly. That's okay. That's the big piece there. But it didn't just happen, right? It's, again, with experience, with all the life issues that I've had, with my work experience, that kind of thing, I'm now comfortable with who I am. And yeah, that imposter syndrome pops up for me every once in a while, but I know about it. I'm like, oh, it's just a thought. So I kind of just push it off to the side and then I move on my merry way. But it's been a lot of personal development to get here. So, okay, so I want to shift the conversation a little bit. So I know that you use, and it could be along the same lines, neurological framework for understanding the drivers of the behavior. And I think we've already talked about a few of those, but can you explain, either Heather or Anne, what those neurological frameworks are that you use for understanding those behavior drivers? Because I think a lot of people want to know, like for me, once I understood how my brain works, that I have to collect facts before I make a decision, that made a big difference. But I know other people, like salespeople, they know that they want to make $1 million, but they have no idea how they're going to do it. So it's completely different. So let's talk a little bit about that neurological framework.
So I'll start off. Anne and I have always, and Anne's sort of the whole background is in personality type, right? Using Carl Jung's original theory of the 4 functions. And we were big users of the Myers-Briggs and with our clients. But what we found was it didn't go far enough. Just looking at personality type, which, sorts us into, what are your strengths and what are some of your blind spots? And, the question that we always had was, why do I behave the way I do? Why do they? Like, we understand our personality, but there's got to be something else that's behind it, because even when we would give a client the path forward, even when we would, sort of show them the way, they would still choose other behavior. And so in the work that Anne was doing around personality type, started to evolve it and integrate more of that, thinking about it from an emotional driver perspective, right? And she was able to identify the fact that for each one of the brain functions, depending on whether we use it internally or outerly, there was a specific hardwired innate psychological need that had to be met for us to feel satisfied, for us to really feel like we were on our path, being, self-actualizing. But more importantly, that when this need was not being met, our behavior would shift in ways that were not productive for us, that were more self-protective. They were fear-based behaviors. So for example, with one of the personality styles, that they have a need to be in control. And that need to be in control is so great that if they are out of control, they will go into bullying, devaluing, passive aggressive behavior in order to get back into control. And that need for control means that everything they do in their outer world, everything going on in their outer world has to be, they have to have that feeling that it's in control. It's so important to them psychologically. So if we know that and we're dealing with someone with that need, we know how to help them stay in control. We know how to teach them the techniques. So having a plan. I use an example. My ex-husband actually had a need to be in control. And he would say, if we're doing nothing, can you tell me that the plan is to do nothing, so that I know that the plan is to do nothing? Because he needed a plan. Like me, I could just go do nothing. Doing nothing means like just hanging around the house, right? But he had to know that the plan was to do nothing, because he couldn't relax and do nothing until he knew that that was the plan. That's the need to be in control, highly activated, right? And I would be like, but when we started to put these emotional drivers alongside a personality type, my predominant need is to be recognized. And so when I'm not in that place where I feel like I'm achieving, that I'm mastering, that I'm, being seen the way I want to be seen, then my need gets frustrated, right? And so then there's other things that I might do. Like we talk about my personality style and the need to be recognized. We can be the best of the best or the worst of the worst, right? If I'm not going to get good recognition, I'll go after the not so good recognition. So that's, and again, there's 8 different needs, and each one of them too has a corresponding fear, thing that they are most afraid of. So my need to be recognized, the trigger for me is anything that might shame me. So I'm more likely to get pushed into my imposter syndrome script, or I'm more likely to avoid something if I believe it will bring shame to me or cause me to feel shame. So I go into avoidant mode. So now it's like, oh, like this is why I'm behaving like this. Oh, wow. Now I totally get it. And I can also look at my life and go, are my needs getting met, right? Are these psychological needs of mine not getting met? And am I activating it in a positive, productive way, or am I doing it out of fear?
That is so interesting, Heather, because I just had an aha moment when you were talking about the fact that your ex-husband needed a plan. And if you guys were going to do nothing, he just needed to know to do nothing, because that happens to me and my husband. Like, he'll be like, what are we doing tonight? Like, well, in my head, I'm like, well, if we haven't thought or if we haven't talked about anything that we're doing tonight, then you can safely assume that we're doing nothing. So that goes through my head, but we've never talked about it. And so, and if I say, well, I don't have any plans, then he's like, oh, okay. But it's always like, what are we doing tonight? Well, I don't know. Like, why do you always have to ask me that question? or what do you want to do tonight? Well, what are my options? Like, what are my options? And then we are like stuck in that same like nagging conversation. But that really helps me to just let my husband know ahead of time, hey, you know what, there's no plans tonight, and then we could do whatever. And it takes that that need for him to know, what are we doing tonight? So that I'm actually going to improve my relationship just from today's conversation. So that's awesome. Well, obviously, we can continue to talk about all this stuff, but I know that you both have a unique story. So I was wondering, maybe, Anne, if you want to tell us about your story, because again, it's quite unique. So can we get into how your relationship is now and how you actually got to work together and how you got into the work that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Usually Heather tells this story when we're talking, so I get to tell it from my perspective now. So when I was 16, I gave birth to Heather, just a week shy of my 17th birthday. And I gave Heather up for adoption and reunited with her through an adoption agency here in Ontario. I was in Ontario, Heather was out in BC at the time. And when she was 27, because Heather was looking, she was about to get married, she had gotten engaged, and she was looking for her biological history, medical records, that type of, all of that type of information. And fortunately here in Canada, at the time, we had an adoption registry. And so both myself and Heather's biological father's mother, her paternal grandmother, had signed up as well. And so we were notified. And of course, it was incredibly exciting and nerve-wracking. And because we lived on different sides of the country, our first conversations were on the phone because we didn't have Zoom at the time. And so my husband and I went out and met Heather, I guess 3 months after our first conversation, but 3 months after. Yes.
That's incredible. And Heather, what was your feeling like? What were you looking for as far as answers are concerned when you sought out Anne?
Anne was serious when I wrote in for medical information, and I got an entire family out of the deal.
That's awesome.
A very large family.
A very large family. So that was a bit of a surprise, but it was phenomenal. But for me, I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't looking for a mother. I wasn't looking for, and I grew up knowing I was adopted. I have 2 siblings that were adopted as well. So all 3 of us. Growing up, my adoptive mom talked about it openly. She referred to us as a gift, that she received, and that had always encouraged all 3 of us that if at any point in time we wanted to go and seek out our biological family, that she was 100% behind it. So I think that I didn't have this like burning need to meet my family. I had a curiosity, right? I had a curiosity. My brain works that way. I'm curious about a lot. I want to understand things. But it was really cool because, and this is one of the things I always say is you grow up as an adopted child, no one looks like you. No one talks like you. You don't really you're there, but you're not there, right? Like as part of the family. And at the time, the 60s and 70s, there was still a lot of bias against adopted kids that we were experiencing, even in our own family. And then all of a sudden you meet these people and they look like you, they talk like you, they have like inflections and mannerisms. Like I grew up 27 years not seeing these people. I'm listening to Anne's voice message on her phone for the first time, and I say to my fiance, she sounds just like me. It was so strange. But so for me, I was blessed, absolutely blessed. I mean, my paternal grandmother was an amazing woman, and to have had the opportunity to experience her, to have my kids experience her before she passed away. Anne's family, huge family. So I just got this great benefit. And then Anne and I went into business together 3 years later. Yeah. 3 years later, I'd had my son, and I was working in consulting. Not very supportive of the whole work-life integration notion, being a female, I was a partner in the firm that I was at. And we got to talking, and I tried to move back to Toronto to take a job, didn't work out. And I was going back to, my husband and I are going back to BC with our 4-month-old, and Anne and I got to talking, and we said, why don't we just do this together? And that was it. So it's been 25 years that we've been in business together. Get to mark it off based on the age of my son. He just passed his 25th birthday. So our business will be 25 years old in October. And it's been a phenomenal experience from the fact that Anne and I have different personality styles, but we complement each other very well. We've had our challenges. We were forging a personal relationship. At the same time, we were starting up a business together. Yes. And we have different skills and abilities and trying to make that work, but we're old hat at it now. But, at least we can sometimes, we call each other out and we're a little bit more open. It's not as scary because at the time it was, even for me starting off a business with her, the relationship's still really new. And so how do I be really authentic and present when I don't want this woman to decide I'm not good enough, right? Going back to the imposter syndrome, right? Can you imagine your biological mom reuniting and then her saying, yeah, I don't want anything to do with this kid. So we had to work through all of that, and equally, I'm sure on her side, right? It's like I finally got my daughter back. I don't want anything to happen that's gonna fracture this delicate balance that we have going on. But we've managed, and here we are 25 years later.
Well, I think that's such a brave endeavor that you went into, having a newish relationship with your biological mom and then deciding to go into business. I don't know that I could have done that because of what you just said. You know, it's fragile. The relationship is fragile. You're building it, you're reconnecting, but then being a solopreneur, I know it is so hard to start a business and all of the ramifications that go with it. And now I just wrestle with myself, you know, and then I figure it out. But, you know, having those, especially having two personalities coming at it from different perspectives, but with all of your knowledge and your training, you know, it's wonderful that you've been able to have this business, a successful business for 25 years now. So kudos to you both for.
And if I can just link this a bit more to the imposter syndrome, you see, most relationships are based on roles. And so the mother-daughter relationship, for example, or the business partner relationship. And we were pretty conscious about, you know, we weren't going into a mother-daughter role. We were sort of a non-role space. And, you know, trying to see if we could build a friendship in the beginning. And that's what we were able to build on because, you know, we have enough of our personalities are similar. We like this same type of things. We're both very active and love to travel. We had so much in common from that perspective. But we were really clear on the roles that we could play in the business and what both of us brought to the business that was different. And so we weren't really competing to see who could, you know, be better at the financial side of it or it was just that, you know, let's build it based on what we want and seeing what we wanted to build and staying focused on our vision as opposed to really focusing on the fact that we were biologically related. You know, we tended not to talk about that a whole lot, given that we're both thinking types.
Right. And you know what, to your point, my daughter, so I have a son who's 24 and my daughter's 22. And my son was a little bit easier through his teen years than my daughter was. But now she's 22, she has her own place, and our relationship has really blossomed into a friendship. Like she tells me stuff that she does, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like, but at the same time, yeah, I'm like, you know what? I don't agree with it. I don't say anything to her. I don't judge her because now we are in that friendship role. Yeah. And she gave me, for my birthday, she gave me the sweetest, most beautiful card, you know, that she really considers me as one of her best friends. And I was just like, oh, you know, of course I'm crying, but it's just so wonderful to shift from that parental role to that friendship role. And it's just priceless. I love our friendship now. And, you know, so I'm glad that you said that, Anne, because when you started your relationship, you weren't going at it from a maternal perspective or from that, you know, mother-daughter, but more from a friendship and then business, you know, colleague. So yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I know we're almost out of time here, but I do want to talk about two quick things, the books that you have. So you have a book, or I believe it's a book, Power Past the Imposter Syndrome. So I think that's critical. And then you have a second book that I looked at, So You Think You Can Lead. So if you can just tell me like 1 minute on each of the books, like what are the benefits of each of those books?
So Power Past the Imposter Syndrome is a book workbook combination in that it takes you through the series of activities that we use with our clients and in our From Imposter to Powerful program. So it will take you on that journey so that you can self-complete each one of the steps, the script we talked about, you know, really starting to build your vision and your perspective of what it is that you want your future self and how that life is going to be for you, and then to build the roadmap to close, again, that developmental gap, but also really helping you to understand and frame the imposter syndrome and those symptoms as just a developmental gap. Now, there's nothing wrong with you. This is normal. This is human. We all have them. And this is what we do in our journey as human beings, is to work to close that developmental gap.
Good. I'm excited about that one because with the workbook, people can actually do actionable things in the workbook. And then what about the other one, the so you think you can lead?
So you think you can lead was we developed it because we were doing a lot of leadership development programs at the time, and we recognized that there was actually no step-by-step approach for leaders to understand how to meet their employees' needs in the performance development cycle and how to shift their own leadership approach. And so we essentially created a guidebook in essence for all of the competencies a leader needs to develop during the first stage when they're instructing, and that they need to be self-aware and they need to be directive as opposed to informational, and how to coach and how to let go and not micromanage people when they've achieved mastery. You see, and so every step of the way, we have different competencies and exercises, things that leaders can do in order to develop up their leadership competence. And so it's a more objective approach, and leaders can easily identify and do in our programs where they'll say, oh man, I really need to work on step one because I want, I love it when they know how to do stuff and I just tell them what to do and then I leave them alone. And of course, that just leaves an employee hanging,
Right.
Because they may need a lot more support than that, you see. And so they get to identify the stage and the leadership approach that they need to work on.
Wonderful. Well, I think those really stood out to me as absolute needs for that manager, that especially that middle manager, that newer middle manager that is, like you said, left hanging themselves because everybody's busy these days. And I think the more tools that they have in order to become effective leaders is just such a necessary tool. And then obviously the Power Past the Imposter Syndrome, that workbook is almost a must-have for every person in the world. So, well, wonderful. Well,
it's also we also have a program available on our website that people can buy. It's a recorded program of the same name, Power Past the Imposter Syndrome. So if they're not keen on having to read, although the book is available on Audible, they can go to our website and purchase the program as well.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I have 3 Audible credits that I was a bit like trying to figure out what I'm going to use them on, and I'm going to do the Power Past the Imposter Syndrome. So, well, ladies, this has been a wonderful conversation. Everything that we've talked about for my podcast is geared towards women in the corporate world, trying to continue to advance in their careers. And again, because I was at this event just a couple of weeks ago, I was like, oh man, the imposter syndrome is really where I wanted to focus. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation because this is exactly what women in corporate need to continue to advance, even though some of them are already there, just to get rid of, or not rid of, but be in harmony with their thoughts and their ideas so that they can know when that imposter syndrome comes up. So thank you so much for all of your wisdom. I would like to ask you if you have 2 actionable tips, and I know you've given us a lot already, but 2 actionable tips that women in the corporate world could apply to their careers.
The first one, I was just having this conversation with someone yesterday, is the vision. And it's so important to have that vision, not just goals from that perspective of I want to be here, I want to be there, is to really have what we call a powerful vision articulated. What's the experience going to be like? What are the feelings going to be like? What are all of those elements of your vision? Because we need our ambition to be stronger than our fear. And that's what keeps us moving through and beyond. The imposter syndrome is when we can hold that and keep reinforcing that for ourselves. And the second one is along with that vision is you need a roadmap, because so often we will conceive of what we want, but we won't then say, well, what do I need to do first and what do I need to do second? And everything that we do is about the experience. And so we have to move that vision into action. And if we don't have that roadmap, we can really get stuck between our current reality versus what it is that we most desire for ourselves.
I absolutely love those, especially the second one, Heather, because I have a quiz, and one of my quiz is about 3 ways that you sabotage your career advancement. And one of the pitfalls is not having a focused strategy, which is that roadmap. And 60% of the people that are taking my quiz are falling into that, not having that focused strategy. So I could not agree with you more on that. Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. So I want to leave each of you with just a final thought.
I guess what I feel is most important as a final thought is that women begin to embrace themselves as human beings that have nothing to prove, and that self-acceptance, self-nurturing, it goes beyond that notion of self-care and you got to love yourself. It's actually holding oneself in esteem and not allowing anyone to take, or not allowing yourself to give that away, because that is yours. It belongs to you, and that to really protect it and honor it at all times.
I love that. Heather, how about you?
How am I supposed to top that one?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, we're not competing. I guess for me is that, it's always that just start, right? It's to move out of the thinking about it and to take action. Any action, right, is a movement forward. And that's what we love to see. And that's what we love to support for all of our female clients that we work out as well, is that one action leads to another action. And that's where the strength comes out, right? We've got it. You've got it inside of you, but just take an action.
That's awesome. And I always end all of my podcasts, and you will hear at the end of this podcast, I always end everything with be brave, be bold, take action, because that's the biggest thing that women need to do. So, well, thank you so much, both of you, for all of your time. I really appreciate this. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let these stories of self-encouragement and professional development serve as a guide in navigating through corporate America in the most practical and fulfilling way possible. Do not forget to subscribe to the show at nowomanleftbehind.com for more content like this. Leave a rating and share it with your friends, because we want to make sure that no woman is left behind. Until I see you next time, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.